Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, I am reviewing the 80s comedy adaptation of the Charles Dickens classic novel A Christmas Carol, Scrooged. Directed by Richard Donner and starring Bill Murray. And while it's not one of his first roles in a leading position, it's the first time old Murray had to carry a film based on his own star power and not being part of an ensemble. Before I get too far into it, if you would like to support the channel, the PayPal link is down below if you want to do a one-off. And if you want to do continued support, the Patreon link is also down below. You'll be able to request videos, and you'll also get access to them early. And to tie into that, this video itself is a request from the Patreon from my good buddy John. Thank you as always, John. It's always good to see you suggest interesting films and all that. And this such one I was actually planning on visiting this time this year, but just your request got me going a little bit more. Now, those of you who watched my nostalgic Christmas specials video last year know that this film is a part of my childhood. Because on that VHS that had the specials, had the Wish Strange Christmas, Frosty the Snowman, The Grinch, Mickey's Christmas Carol. This was after Mickey's Christmas Carol. Now, most of the time I would just watch the opening scene. The night the reindeer died. Lee Majors. Santa with a machine gun. What else can you say? I really wouldn't watch the whole film. I do remember watching it a couple times, but it's like individual scenes that I remember, such as the scene that is the equivalent of Marley coming to warn Scrooge. And then a couple other weird moments, but I don't remember watching it entirely. And then a couple years ago, I came back and revisited it when it was on Netflix, watching it at my friend's house, and I'm like, hey, this film is a little better than I remember. And of course, with the quest, I decided to rewatch it again for this. And it's a film I still do like, but I can see why at the time certain critics, such as Roger Ebert, didn't like it. And I can also understand if nowadays people don't like it as much, like if they think Murray's work in Ghostbusters is better, if they think Groundhog Day is better, but it's a film I have to admit I do love. I really do wish it would get its own special edition release one of these days, because it deserves it, and it would be nice to see Bill Murray actually talk about it now, because he did have some thoughts on it, which I will get to in a bit. And at one point, they were going to do a special edition DVD back in 2006. It was going to be the You'll Love It, and Yule is spelled as in Yuletide. But it never happened, and any and all press for it was eventually recalled, which is a shame. Now, if you're familiar with the story of A Christmas Carol, you can guess where this story is going to be going, but it's a modern slant on it, and it is a comedy, obviously. Now, the plot is that we follow Bill Murray's character, Frank Cross, who is the title character, Scrooge. He is a TV executive. He really is near the top. He still has to answer to the head of the whole production company, but he is a top executive. He lives a solitary life, married to his work, does do some other stuff outside the company, like he gets a charitable award, but it's all for show. That other than his work, he lives a hollow existence, has nothing else to work for, nothing to look forward to, no wife, no children. While he has family, he's not super close to them. You know, like Scrooge, he had a bad childhood, or should I say, partial bad childhood. Some light of his life, he had an ex that he was with for a couple years, but then he left her to concentrate on his career, which at that time was working on a children's television show inside a giant dog outfit. See, modern thing. And he's been this cold person ever since. And we do get to see a little bit of that before the ghosts come in, and it's a good amount of it. He fires somebody on Christmas just because they voice a disagreement on what he wants to do for the Scrooged production that they're going to be doing live on Christmas Eve, their adaptation of the novel. So there's an adaptation within an adaptation, which the adaptation inside the adaptation is a more faithful adaptation than the adaptation we are watching. Say that 5 times fast. And just the way it happens, it kind of reminds me of the Monty Python sketch with the Texas movie producer, "You'll never work in this town again!" Which, of course, as I've referenced before, is also like Vince McMahon in the production meetings. "Well, pal, I think it's a good idea because it's my idea, pal." Gives bonuses to his employees, which are just towels and VCR recorders. Even sends one of those to his brother. Is like, really? That's a gift for your brother? Well, I guess a VCR would be a good gift in the 80s, but it'd be a more expensive gift at the beginning of the 80s than later in the 80s. Because by that point, that's when you would start doing the 2 VCR trick to record bootleg copies of movies. And those of you who are going to go, what? Don't pretend like your parents never did that. They all did. We all know it. And of course, his ad that he fires a guy for disagreeing over is like, ooh, that's very over the top. But it does fit with the over-the-top excess of the 80s. You've seen it in a lot of other movies like Wall Street. So this is the type of thing that really fits, and it ties in with the humor along with what they're planning for their adaptation of Scrooge. I mean, they got the Scroogettes. They got a gymnast playing Tiny Tim, which is like, that's really taking the God bless us everyone to the over-the-top territory. His ad has nukes in it, which apparently causes one lady to have a heart attack. And then, of course, what I've already mentioned, the thing that opens the film, the night the reindeer died. Although, part of me would be curious to see an actual full version of that film with Lee Majors kicking terrorists' butt up at the North Pole, and then Santa and Mrs. Claus mowing down terrorists if they get too close. We all know we'd watch that, even out of just morbid curiosity. Well, Cross's day continues. We get to see the Bob Cratchit analog, who is a female, and a black female of that. I'm actually surprised that nobody tries to complain about that, because you think nowadays if they were to do this film, I see that's something that the anti-SJW crowd, and I mean the ones that really get anti with it, would probably want to complain about that, but it works for the film. We see her son, who instead of being crippled, he's mute. See that their Christmas is not so jolly, partially due to Cross's actions. But then Cross eventually meets his old boss, who is to the TV industry what Jacob Marley was to the lending industry in the original story. He's dead, which that leads to one of my funny little gags. You see the little ball coming out of his head, and you see the rat. And of course, Cross shoots him, and he tells him, like, respect the alcohol. I forget the exact wording, what alcohol it is, but he's like, don't disrespect it. Because he's pouring it. It's like, you're going to disrespect the alcohol, you're disrespecting me. Well, his old boss gives Cross the warning, you're going to be visited by 3 spirits. It was too late for me to change, it was not too late for you. And Cross, played beautifully by Bill Murray in this thing, like, even though he does get literally the bejesus scared out of him because he's put out the window. As the film goes on, Cross is slowly visited by the 3 spirits who show him his past, the present, and if he continues on his trajectory, the future, in a way that is so over the top and fun that fits the tone that this film is going for. Now, while this is going on, he is reconnecting with his old flame, who's played by Karen Allen of Raiders of the Lost Ark fame, and she and Murray do have a pretty good chemistry. It's different than the chemistry Bill Murray and Sigourney Weaver had in Ghostbusters, but it's just as believable, and it definitely fits these two. And what adds to it is the fact for the Ghost of Christmas Past, we do see the flashback of how they met, which it's such a slice of life way to meet, but it so fits how Cross was as a younger man, especially since Bill Murray has that longer hair in the flashback, and the way Murray plays it off, that it might be a little awkward, but it's so fitting and genuine and has heart to it that you can see how Claire, that's the name of Alan's character, you can see why she fell for him. And it's so genuine and makes you feel it when you see their relationship go, and you're like, you know this is not going to end well. Then you see why they broke up, and it's like, ugh. Cross, you stupid man. You really pushed her away just to continue your career playing in a dog outfit just because you were invited to dinner when you already had plans like that. You stupid man. But unlike the original story where Scrooge is too old and all that, and his love has moved on, married and had children, at this time it's only like a decade later. They're still relatively young, and when we see them interact throughout the course of the film, you could tell that there's still an attraction there, and they still have feelings for one another. They're just buried beneath the additional years. And of course, by the end, they do reconcile, which is what adds a little bit of heart and sentiment to the ending of the film. It's one of those things that tugs at the heartstrings. And as you can kind of guess, like the original story, Cross does learn the error of his ways, and he does change, and since it involves a live network production, he goes there and it has a very, very heartfelt ending where they're singing "Put a Little Love in Your Heart," and it does fit the whole thing, especially with how Murray seems to ad-lib around parts of it. And when he comes back from the ghost things, how he interrupts the production of the Scrooge thing, whether it's their rehearsals or the actual takes, it adds to the humor. And you can definitely see the rest of the cast around him going, I think Cross is losing his mind, guys. I think he's starting to think he actually is Scrooge. Danny Elfman conducted the score, and even without reading the credit, you could tell because it has that Danny Elfman feel from the late 80s and the early 90s, where it's the same type of instruments. Very Beetlejuice and Batman-esque in how all the instrumentation is written down. But it also has that holiday vibe, so in a way it kind of also has that feel kind of like Batman Returns and The Nightmare Before Christmas. And it really does fit the whole tone of the film. I mean, if you're going to add a little bit of a darker comedic spin on A Christmas Carol, you're going to throw that in. The more dark scenes fits, the comedic and heartfelt scenes, it pulls at the heartstrings. Definitely one I want to listen to independently of the film to see how it plays off, like some of the other scores of his I have done. Richard Donner did a pretty good job directing, and you can see some of his typical camera work here. This is a film he made in between Lethal Weapon 1 and 2, so I guess it's like, I don't want to do that one yet, I'll do an in-between film. And I would say those two films I might have more rewatch value with, but I haven't watched those films in a couple of years, so we'll see how that is. This one, of course, I'll always have that nostalgic value for, like I said at the top of the video. Now, before he directed it, he had reservations about turning The Christmas Carol into a comedy, because as he put it, it's a thin line. But with the right screenwriters on hand, he was able to get over that. And although Murray does do a good job in the film, him and Dick Donner did not get along. This is what Murray told Roger Ebert in an interview, which is an aside. Roger Ebert is one of the critics who didn't like this movie, and he said it was the worst adaptation of the novel he's ever seen. Which to me, I go, okay. That's because it's not a faithful story plot-wise. Does not mean it's the worst, but that's the man's opinion. Now, this is what Murray said when he was asked if they didn't get along. Only a few. Every single minute of every day. That could have been a really, really great movie. The script was good. There's maybe one take in the final cut of the movie that's mine. We made it so fast, it was like doing a movie live. He kept telling me to do things louder, louder, louder. I think he was deaf. Now, on IMDb, it didn't have a year for that, but I'm going to guess he probably said that in the 90s. That time period where he wasn't making a lot of movies and he was estranged from Harold Ramis. Maybe also in the early 2000s when that estrangement was still there. That's where I could see him saying that. And watching the film, I could kind of see why Murray would have that opinion of it, especially compared to Ghostbusters 1. I mean, we all know what his thoughts on Ghostbusters 2 were, a lot of slime and not a lot of us, but he's kind of softened on that. So I'd love to see what his thoughts on this film are more recently, see if they've changed or not. Here, though, it's like, he does still do a good job, as I've said a bunch of times in here. I think part of the reason that he's so hard on the film in himself is, one, him not getting along with Dick Donner, but also the fact this is the first time he had to carry a movie on himself. And artists usually seem to be their own worst critics. I mean, when it comes to me editing my AMVs and movie tributes, I'm always my worst critic on that, even if a lot of people like it and all that. It's like, I always look at it like, probably could have cut that a couple frames sooner, could have paced that just a bit better, could have cross-cut a bit more there. It's one of those things. So probably Murray looking back at the film, watching, go like, yeah, not the best there, not the best there. As for the louder, 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 that's going to depend on the scene in question, but it's probably to bring up the energy of the scene and make Cross seem a little bit more like he's going off the deep end and everyone's like, I don't know what's going on with him, instead of being fully dry. I mean, Murray's dryness does work in the times he does, like when he sees his old boss, but there are times where the loudness also works. And this is what Donner had to say on directing Murray, and unlike Murray's, we actually have a year to go with this, and this is from 1988. It's like standing on 42nd Street and Broadway, and the lights are out, and you're a traffic cop. Now, the way that's worded, you can look at that in both a positive manner and a negative manner. Negative manner is that you gotta guide him like traffic, that, it could get chaotic, but you gotta keep it under control. Now, Now, the positive with that, and it ties into that as well, is that when you give Murray the right direction and let him go with it in a controlled manner, you can pull an excellent performance out of him, and you can also get excellent witty dialogue. And we've seen that in other films. I mean, Ghostbusters is a prime example. You know, I mean, that's how we get Murray saying lines like, "Yes, this is true. This man has no dick." The makeup effects for this film are great. I mean, on Murray's old boss, it's all decomposing, the skeleton thing, parts of him falling off when Murray's interacting with him. The makeup on the ghost is pretty good. I mean, it's like subtler compared to it, but it works. Making the Ghost of Christmas Present really look like a fairy ballerina definitely works and definitely fits Carol Kane well. And then, of course, the two different versions of the Ghost of Christmas Future they made, the one that's for the show and then the one that's the actual ghost. That's pretty good. Which his introduction is probably one of the scenes that Dick Donner had him go louder because he's like expecting the ghost and then sees the prop one. The set design is pretty good. Like for the teleplay one, you can definitely tell that it is the set. It's for a live play, but it definitely has a little bit of that television look there. It's the kind of the cross between where you see like, okay, play meets TV. Nice. Like a sitcom set almost, as it were. If they were actually showing the episode live instead of recording it and then showing it. Yeah. Now there's a lot of trivia to go over, but I've got down the bare bones ones here. And if anyone's wondering who the rest of the cast are, we got John Glover in there, playing Bryce Cummings, who was a guy hired to help Cross's character. Now, there's a couple moments where he does kind of seem like he could be a jerk, but he's reacting to Cross from just what he sees. If you were to look at the situation outside of what the audience sees, then you can understand it. The way Glover plays it, though, it kind of feels a little bit like his character from Gremlins 2. Not to say that's a bad thing, but other than some of the more eccentric things that his character in that film has, there's really not much else to say. He's just a typical network executive. David Johansen is the Ghost of Christmas Past. He was friends with Murray, so that helped him get the role. He does a pretty good job. You know, typical New York cab guy, but he adds some nice little banter in their interaction. Carol Kane is the Ghost of Christmas Present. All sweet and charming, but then she roughs up the Bill Murray. And that's where a little bit of the trivia is that Carol Kane did not like that she had to rough up Bill during those, and she would get a little upset. And during one of the takes, she accidentally tore his lip, which is like, ow, how hard did you grab his lip, Carol? Oh, that was smart. Alfre Woodard is Grace Cooley. That's the analog for Cratchit. And then, of course, Nicholas Phillips, who plays her son Calvin, who is the Tiny Tim, who his first line at the end, of course, is the God bless us everyone, which is a nice little heartfelt moment, which is why the ending is so heartfelt there. Now, I mentioned the romantic subplot earlier. A little bit of trivia here is that when Murray signed on, that was a very subtle subplot. And probably like how it was in the original novel, just part of the flashback. But once he signed up, they built up that and made it a little bit more important. Which I do think helps the heart of the film. I cannot imagine how that part of the film where Murray is reflecting on his past and trying to make amends while still trying to kick his old personality out. I don't know how that part of the film would play without that. I mean, it probably could have. They probably had a bunch of other things they could have put in. I mean, Bill Murray also said on record there was a lot of other stuff they shot that wasn't in the film, so probably take some of that and fill it in. But just because they have it and it's there to fill it in doesn't mean it would work as well. Could probably be decent, but I am a romantic and I'm a sucker for a good romance subplot right there, especially when it has good chemistry, good writing, and it has a decent payoff like we do with this one. I think this is one of the few versions of Scrooged where he actually does get the girl in the end. I mean, he still does get a happy ending because he comes like a second father to Tiny Tim in the more traditional ones, but here it's a different type of happy ending. Don't go there, you dirty-minded people. Overall, Scrooged is a pretty good adaptation of the novel. I don't know if I would put it at my favorite, because I haven't seen every version of A Christmas Carol, so I can't comment. I mean, it's definitely one I see myself watching. Instead of renting it, I actually bought the digital copy. I know some people are going to go, what? I know, but... I mean, they have the Blu-ray and all that, but without there being a special edition one, it's like, I'd rather, fuck it, I'll just buy it, then I can watch it on here whenever I want. A lot easier. Like I said, Score is decent. The acting performances from the lead cast are good. The supporting cast, other than the people I mentioned, are all pretty good for the roles they have to do. Dick Donner's direction is also top-notch here. I mean, it's not his best direction. I mean, look at the Lethal Weapon films and his Superman films if you want to see it a little bit more. And also maybe throw in Goonies there, too. And all in all, is a great Christmas film. If you haven't seen it, it does come with my recommendation. If you're not the biggest fan of Bill Murray, if you're not the biggest fan of comedies that make fun of the excess of the 80s with over-the-top stuff, you might not like it as much. And if you're a fan of the novel but hate it when they stray too far from it plot-wise, you might not like it as well. But if you can watch it for what it is, you can get enjoyment out of it.